Good afternoon and welcome to this month's show. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders in rolling out 5G strategies and technologies. With me on today's show are Daniel Massey, Program Lead, 5G Initiative, Department of Defense; Rob Butel, Deputy Chief Technology Officer, U.S. Air Force; DeVarious Peoples, Chief Information Officer, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers; Stephen Douglas, Head of 5G Strategy, Sparrond Communications; John Davis, Vice President Public Sector at Palo Alto Networks; and Brian Tromsky, Managing Partner 5G Public Sector at Verizon. Well, we've come out of the petri dish with 5G and we're into, quite frankly, full implementation. Dan, let's start with you and talk about just the state of 5G across the Department of Defense.
Great. Well, thank you. So, 5G is really becoming a critical part of Department of Defense operations and communications at this point. I'm part of the 5G initiative at DoD. We have 5G deployed at 16 bases around the country. We are looking at new technologies in the innovate sector, what happens in the remaining 5G standardization process and 6G and beyond. And in my part of the portfolio in particular, operating through commercial 5G networks anywhere in the world. So we're moving forward on all those. We have great things like we're using 5G in Albany, Georgia, Coronado, California to build smart warehouses, taking advantage of that ability to have 5G cover massive amounts of connectivity. We're looking at spectrum sharing. I'm looking at projects that link into autonomous vehicles, and we could spend the rest of this program talking about all the different options, but we're very excited to be moving out with 5G. It's a critical part of the DoD communication strategy, and we're actively pushing forward on that.
I heard you say 6G, but I think the message there is 5G is here. It's being fully implemented across a variety of use cases, and we're very excited about hearing more. Rob, how about at U.S. Air Force? I can't imagine the use cases at the U.S. Air Force for this type of technology.
Yeah, so to work off of Dr. Massey's comments, of the 16 bases he's referring to, 5 of them are Air Force bases. A couple to emphasize are like the spectrum sharing effort. There's a major focus of that is at Hill Air Force Base. There's already been some immediate successes, and we're going to have some reports coming out here in the very near future detailing some of that. Also, some core security efforts down at the test bed at Joint Base San Antonio, which is going to have broad-reaching impacts across not just the Air Force, but the entire DoD, as we learn more about what it means to both secure and operate efficiently within a 5G framework.
I can't imagine all the capabilities that one can unlock when you start to fully realize and implement this. Again, I'm sure we're going to hear more about it. DeVarious, how about over at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers? Last time we had you on here, you all were on a tear there as far as rolling out capabilities. Very anxious to hear what's up with 5G.
Yes, sir. We are definitely leveraging 5G from Army Corps of Engineers perspective. First, just to like to say thank you for the opportunity to come again and chat. But several things we're doing from the Corps of Engineers. As you know, we're in all areas within the United States, 50 states. So some of the things we've done, we've rolled 5G out to 44 of the 50 sites that we have. But we're specifically leveraging 5G for the disaster relief mission. So we've expanded that to our FirstNet capabilities. So when things such as hurricanes, natural disasters happen, we're leveraging 5G from a telecommunications perspective and FirstNet to be able to rapidly install or restore actual telecommunications throughout the nation to prevent any lingering effect as it pertains to being able to connect and communicate. So that's just one example of one of the ways we begin to deploy and see goodness from a 5G perspective within the Army Corps of Engineers.
Wow. Again, fully realizing this capability, it's operational in the field. Stephen, give us a primer, if you will, on what your organization does and then how it can fit into this community's capabilities.
Yeah, look, so Sparrond is one of the leading test and assurance vendors in the telecommunications sector. And today we're engaged in roughly 1,800 global 5G engagements right across the commercial sector, but also with government and defense. And specifically for government and military standpoint, I mean, there's 4 common initiatives we're sort of globally involved with. The first of those is around 5G supply chain security, where we're working with some of the new national telecoms labs and test beds to provide a testing framework and methodology for performance and security validation of the new vendors, the multi-vendor operability and the digital supply chains. The secondary area we're sort of working heavily around is with the national security agencies themselves, providing them, in essence, a representative 5G virtual sandboxes to allow them to research risks and mitigations, specifically around the heightened focus of using 5G for critical national infrastructure in our energy and utility sectors, transportation, manufacturing. And then we're working quite closely also with the defense industry as well, and many of the major contractors, and supporting them in prototyping some of the use cases with our 5G digital twin emulation environments around smart bases, AR, VR, for example. And probably the last area, look, I think is becoming more prevalent as we're starting to focus around how do you operationalize 5G for defense use cases. So moving from experimentation to adoption, and looking at what type of sort of real world testing under congested and contested environments you would need to go through to make sure that you could stress test a system that it could go operationally live.
And we certainly do appreciate it. There's no doubt that when you have an emerging technology like this that's rapidly being developed, you want to make sure that as you're plugging these capabilities together, things snap together properly, et cetera, especially in the use cases we're talking about on this forum. John, no doubt you're running into this very situation at Palo Alto Networks as you're rolling this type of capability out. What are you seeing out there?
Thank you, Luke, and hello, everyone. Well, a lot of progress from a company perspective. As one of the recognized leaders, technical leaders in 5G security, we've engaged in several industry organizations that represent mobile network operators and the mobile ecosystem, including groups that issue standards and technical reference documents used by operators worldwide, including those in the public sector. As of April of 21, we had been granted 19 US patents for our unique 5G and 4G security technologies, and now we're up to 30. So that shows you the level of investment and research involved. In November of 2020, we launched the industry's first 5G native security offering, and in that same month, we were also selected to join a consortium of technology collaborators in a new 5G security project launched by NIST's National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, or NCCOE. This is a project that can help organizations understand the cybersecurity opportunities, challenges, and risks associated with 5G network deployment, operation, and use. And it also provides information that organizations can use to design, acquire, implement, and operate 5G networks, taking into consideration the security of full hardware to software stack. The NCCOE has released a preliminary draft NIST Cybersecurity Practice Guide, SP 1800-33. It's open for public comment until the 27th of June, 2022. So we're proud of the progress that all these things represent, and we continue to work hard to lead the way as a company and to partner with those government organizations that do the same.
Right. You know, I get the sense that the tracks are really being laid down on this technology, and now the up the stack, if you will, up the value chain on the implementation. So appreciate all the hard work to make sure those things are coming together nice and firmly and without any type of complications. Brian, Verizon, no question, has been on an absolute tear in rolling out 5G. Give us the state from where you all sit in regards to just overall footprint, et cetera, on where we are with Verizon and 5G.
Yeah, we're excited. Thanks for the opportunity, Luke, to be here, and also the panelists to share with this great topic. We are on a tear right now in building out and constructing 5G. January of this year was a game changer for us as we had our first acquisition of the C-band, so rolling out 5G on the mid-band spectrum to actually deliver 5G far and wide. We're very excited participating with the OTAs from a research engineering standpoint with the DoD. And then as Stephen mentioned, actually more in the operational phase. So what we're doing today is actually building out our networks far and wide. And for instance, with Rob and what he's doing with the Air Force, we're actively rolling out on 17 Air Force bases between OTL-1 and OTL-2B. Very excited with Tyndall Air Force Base being one of those 5G locations. So, there's a lot of interest, obviously, in 5G, but more importantly, it's not just the research and engineering, the AR and VR. One of the big use cases that we see not only in the DoD, but in the federal government is actually just wall broadband services, right? And we look at 5G as offering that type of service to actually close the digital divide in a lot of cases, right? So if we're talking anywhere from recruiting offices to provide broadband in remote areas and rural communities, is huge, right? And having one network infrastructure to actually support all these different technologies is very exciting. And then when you start looking at other technologies and our partnerships with leading cloud service providers, right, when you're actually talking about mobile edge compute. So it's not just the RF and the radio access network, it's actually looking at the applications and actually how they work and how you can make them better with the 5G technology and combining things like edge computing. And as John just mentioned, cybersecurity is very near and dear to us, not only from an offering in terms of service, but more importantly, supply chain and actually making sure we have vetted partners and suppliers as we build our 5G network.
And no question about that. And as these applications are now being written with 5G, assuming that capability is there, the potential to unlock is, I'm sure, endless. Rob, you touched on some implementations in the Air Force bases. Why don't you give us a specific program that you'd like to highlight in regards to the implementation? There's no question the tone here, you get the message is the DoD in general, very aggressive with implementing 5G in a variety of scenarios. How about at the Air Force?
Yeah, I think I'll take my cue from Brian and talk about Tyndall. So Tyndall's a unique situation because back in 2019, Hurricane Michael.
For those, if I may, for those that might not know what Tyndall is.
It's an Air Force base. Yeah.
Okay.
So Tyndall Air Force Base, it's down Panama City, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Hurricane Michael in 2019 pretty much effectively wiped it out. So as we were looking to rebuild it, the Air Force said, "Hey, why don't we take it out? Let's turn this problem into an opportunity." And we started the Installation of the Future program. So as a part of that, it included a very heavy IT forward-looking piece to which that contract was actually granted to AT&T. So they came in under the Installation of the Future, and we have a full AT&T instantiation of 5G. Also, as Brian mentioned, under our Opportunity to Lease CONUS program, Verizon has been the main vendor on Phase 1 and Phase 2B. And under Phase 1, the Tyndall Air Force Base was a part of that. So they also have a full 5G presence there. So now we have a unique opportunity to base where we have two of the primary vendors out there with a full implementation. So it is a tremendous opportunity, not just to prove out 5G, but to show that multiple vendors can operate together. We can take advantage of those different pieces, parts, and really, I think it's a model for the way we need to look at installations as we move forward in the Air Force.
Fantastic. And Stephen, I'm sure that's music to your ears to hear that interoperability. Give us an example of a program that you would like to highlight.
Yeah, probably the biggest programs we've been involved with lately have been some of the leading service providers are starting now their move to what I would call the second phase of 5G or true 5G, the standalone version of it, where they're adding the new 5G core network. And we've been working with them to develop these continuous testing and monitoring environments to allow them to deal with the new challenges of how do you get multi-vendors to collaborate together, the interoperability, the use of the cloud network as part of even the architecture, and also to deal with the operational processes around it. I mean, we're seeing, a 10x increase in the volume of software releases and changes coming onto the network. So what's really going to be required is a new sort of automated environment that we can continuously revalidate the conformance, the performance, and even the security efficacy from the live right through to from the lab, I should say, right through to live operations. And we have that now deployed with some of the top global service providers who are using that. And that's now also becoming a framework which we're starting to see being used also for Open RAN. As we look at the sort of the radio diversification strategies, how are we going to deal with, again, multi-vendor collaboration? How are we going to get agility brought into actually getting these systems validated and deployed so we can take commercial advantage? And again, the same framework is being used today.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting to hear about how all that collaboration is going on. Dan, I'm sure you're facing this and coordinating this, probably involved in a lot of that interaction that's going on in that program. Tell us about a specific area you'd like to focus on.
Sure, absolutely. I think one of our most interesting challenges is I'll be a little bit vague and intentionally on the program, but one of our biggest challenges is operating over commercial networks. Right? So we have literally trillions. There are literally trillions of dollars going into investing in the 5G infrastructure and the 5G communication systems, and it's very critical that the DoD leverage that investment rather than trying to compete against it with our own bespoke or proprietary systems. So one of the very interesting challenges is, how can DoD best make use of existing commercial infrastructure as a valid user, respecting the mobile network operators, procedures and policies and all that, yet at the same time still being sufficiently secure for national security level concerns for what you might think of as DoD critical operations. So I think that's one of our most interesting challenges, is how do you operate across commercial networks, not just deploy your own private DoD network. And so obviously we need to do both. In terms of operate through, I often like to talk about operating through other infrastructures in the Department of Defense. So if we went anywhere in the world to do a mission, we would not start by building our own bespoke road, rail, and bridge infrastructure. We would try to operate through existing bridges, existing roads, existing rail systems when plausible. Now, at the same time, Army Corps of Engineers can span a river, build a bridge spanning a river anywhere in the world. We will always have that capability. We always want to continue to have that capability. And we could say the same thing about host country power, about other critical infrastructures. So what about comms? What about 5G? We would like to go in and, when appropriate, leverage existing commercial infrastructure, just like we would leverage existing roads and bridges when appropriate. And also, when appropriate, be able to bring our own infrastructure, just like we can Army Corps of Engineers can build a bridge across any river in the world. So that's one of our biggest challenges. And I will just add one last comment there, which is the commercial infrastructure is fantastic, as many of the commercial speakers here will talk about, all the tremendous investments, the tremendous improvements going out there. From a DoD perspective, security remains one of our critical challenges. And so, can we make that infrastructure secure enough for various DoD missions? I think that's one of the interesting open questions.
Yeah, I would think it's not only secure, obviously secure from a lot of different dimensions, including just resilience, right, and redundancy, et cetera, right? I'm sure that's a big part of that when you're saying secure. You're talking about all the different dimensions of security, reliability, et cetera.
And yes, in fact, if I could follow up on that just a little bit, when we talk about security, we're really talking about 4 aspects of security. And so we have our security folks listening to this will be familiar with the classic, confidentiality, integrity, availability. That's what we usually care about for security. Is our secret data being kept secret? Is the data unmodified? We know who it's coming from. Right? Is the system, as you already pointed out, available and sufficiently accessible for use? I want to highlight one other one, which sometimes can be an interesting challenge, which is observability. Now, for the cybersecurity folks, they'll say, oh, that already fits under the classic confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and it does, and we are not disputing that. But observability can play a very important role as well. I can actually infer quite a bit sometimes by understanding who's talking to whom. Even if the data is encrypted, even if the data isn't, can't modify the data, I can't view the data, but just knowing that for example, in my personal life, I'm sending a number of messages to Luke, Luke's sending messages back to me, might indicate something about future Federal News Network segments or something like
Mhm.
that. So we're very interested in not only ensuring all those classic cybersecurity things, but understanding, what's visible on the network, or what stands out in the network, and what an adversary might infer. So thank you all.
Network reconnaissance. That's an interesting pickup there. So we might scratch on it a little bit more. All right, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on the Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about 5G strategies, 5G implementations. We're just talking about observability as another element, which is interesting. John, I'm going to throw it over to you. Give us an example of a program that you'd like to highlight from where you all sit for the listening audience.
Sure thing, Luke. And you and Dan talking about the security of 5G is music to my ears.
I figured as much.
Well, here's what we're seeing from a 5G security perspective in terms of successful programs. Because of the mission criticality of 5G, the approach to securing it is going to have to be much more sophisticated, enterprise grade, if you will, than security may have been sufficient for previous generations. The proliferation of devices, the vast increase in intelligence at the network edge, and the aggregation of critical functionality at the network core bring out challenges that together contribute really to a perfect storm of security risk in 5G deployments in all the categories that Dan just talked about. The applications and services that ride on 5G networks are just as critical to secure as the network infrastructure itself. So to be successful, government organizations and companies in the critical infrastructure sector need to establish strong security posture that can stop cyber attackers from infiltrating the networks, disrupting critical services, or destroying industrial assets. In mission critical industries, security breaches are going to cost more than just downtime, lost revenue, and maybe even tarnished brands. They can put human lives in jeopardy. So that's why I believe that baking security in upfront to all the promise that 5G provides is so important to a successful program.
Sure. And, there's elements of the security built into this technology, undoubtedly, but there's no question. I'm thinking about the various what you face when you just come up and show up to an open river and drop a bridge in there, right? The attack surface associated to that sort of environment from a technological standpoint must be incredible. So anyway, why don't you give us an example of a program that you'd like to highlight in regards to an implementation? Doesn't have to be a bridge, by the way.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of interesting things as it pertains to the deployment of 5G. But I think one of the things that we would highlight from a Corps of Engineers perspective is really we've built a cyber center of excellence centered around the operational technology component. That is a area that's not really highly spoken of, even though it is probably one of the more critical functions. And with that being said, we have worked with many different mission partners, whether that's CISA, the Army Cyber, U.S. Cyber Command. We've hosted many cybersecurity exercises as well. And as it pertains to that center of excellence, we begin to build this environment from an operational technology perspective that allows us to assess 5G technology, as well as different concepts such as zero trust and many others. Now, when you think about it, why is that important? Because within this cybersecurity center of excellence, from an operational technology perspective, these are the same technical capabilities that will allow us to secure as well as operate efficiently when managing and maintaining things such as levees, locks, dams, many different infrastructure, critical waterways, and those type of things. From a Corps of Engineers perspective, we are the construction agent for not just the Army, but also DOD, and we build on many camp posts and stations as well. So a lot of things such as installations of the future and many other things, we actually provide a lot of helpful insight into how to properly build those. So I think that Cyber Center of Excellence has really allowed us to be able to look at full spectrum operations and many other things. And it's also allowed us to be able to assess operational technology through the leveraging of 5G technical capabilities. And we've seen a lot of success as well as challenges. And I think that's one of the good things that we are proud of being able not just to implement, deploy, but also to sustain and be able to leverage throughout the rest of the department going forward.
A really important part of the operational implementation is ensuring it's hardening from a cyber standpoint. That sounds like a fantastic. How long has that center been in place?
It's been in place now probably for about 18 months.
Okay.
18 months ago, it's out in Branson, Missouri. Phil Copeland is leading that charge for us, and he's doing a very good job from a civil works perspective. So it's been out for about 18 months now.
Great idea, and something perhaps other agencies should look at perhaps modeling it. Brian, how about at Verizon in regards to a lot of different activity? You're seeing it from a standpoint of striping across all these various agencies, the private sector as well. Give us an example of a program that you'd like to bring to the light here.
Yeah, I want to go off of what Dr. Massey said. So one of the things that I'm working on and working with our team, lab team. So we're very excited. In October of 21, we kicked off our Boston facility, which is a lab downtown. And this actually mimics probably around 90% of what our network does today, where we actually give it availability to customers to test, right? So multiple vendors, multiple core vendors, multiple MEC providers, private networks, commercial networks. More importantly, we just set up our quantum key distribution network that will support 5G. So it actually gives the ability for agencies to come into the facility and actually do testing on a real wide network, but more importantly, you can manipulate the network, right? You're not tearing it down or actually adversely affecting the commercial network, right? So having that ability to actually do that in a confined space is very exciting. A lot of agencies are very interested, so you can get raw data and actually how a device interacts with the network. And more importantly, as Dr. Massey said, what kind of showings are actually being seen on the network for that particular device. So that is actually in a lab environment. And more excitingly, with using our commercial network in the spirit of DoD, at the Miramar location there with Major Harvey, we're going to conduct some experiments later this year where we're actually going to do some real testing. And actually, as they deploy autonomous vehicles, drones, and vehicles themselves, they're actually curious to see actually how it interacts on the actual commercial network, what kind of data is actually shown or emitted. And we're very excited to actually kick off that project the second part of this year going into 2023, right? So that's probably the biggest thing that we start to get from agencies and actually from a research and engineering. How does it actually work through a mobile network operator like Verizon, and actually providing some information, which we're excited to, it's new for us, and actually kicking off the labs. And the last thing I'll leave on, Luke, is we're very excited about 5G, but also 4G is going to be around for a very long time, right? So when we talk about 5G, AR, VR, right, that's high bandwidth, when we talk about 5G and IoT, a lot of those devices will not actually use a lot of bandwidth, right? So you can imagine if you're a war fighter, right, actually weaving in chips into BDUs or boots or tools, right, non-electrical tools like shovels, right, picks, right? So as Army Corps of Engineers, so you're going to see a lot more tracking of devices that are going to use the greater 5G ecosystem, but also you're going to use the 4G. So when you talk about like things like narrowband IoT or Cat-M1 networks on LTE, there's going to be millions of those devices, if not billions, being tracked. They'll actually fall into the 5G ecosystem.
No doubt about that, and that's a good catch. I'm sure that's going to be technology will be here for a considerable amount of time. Rob, I want to start with you, and we're going to talk about priorities. I know you've got a lot of moving parts. You talked about a couple of things. I always like to focus on top priorities in the job jar for this year. What are you all trying to sort of pin down or make sure it's well underway by the time this year ends?
So there's really three things. So from an enterprise perspective, like was mentioned earlier, the opportunity to lease initiative where we're trying to bring 5G capabilities to all of the bases across the continental U.S. We want to really make some serious headway on that. We should be about 2/3 of the way, at least have the leases in place, if not have actual implementations in place by the end of the year moving forward. So we're trying to pick up some momentum. We were pretty slow the first couple of years. Brian can attest to some of those issues that we ran across. COVID certainly didn't help. It's really hard to do site visits when you're locked down. Number two, we really want to continue our partnership with DoD on the many experiments that are out there. Tremendous information being gleaned from that. Opportunities not just to learn, but also to take some of those capabilities and actually roll them into existing programs. And then lastly, it's getting real hardcore use cases. So it's 5G in and of itself is not a requirement. It's a solution to a requirement, and it's getting out there and defining what are the real mission requirements so we understand where 5G should be prioritized and how it should be implemented, because 5G is so much more than my phone having faster speed. It is, as was mentioned earlier, the edge computing. It's the tremendous density to improve IoTs and sensor devices out there. It's all of those things. It's really less about the consumer and more about the mission itself and the great capability that it brings to us.
No question, a lot of machine-to-machine capability certainly gets unlocked with this type of technology. Stephen, I can't imagine the amount of activity that's going on right now in regards to what you all do and the advent of all this technology, particularly this getting embedded in these various types of devices. What's on the top of the priority list for you all? What's the demand signal that you're seeing?
I think there's three big areas here. I mean, the first is around that evolution to the standalone, so 5G, with bringing the new core network in, and that's really about enabling new use cases towards the enterprise sector and enabling capabilities for sort of government and defence. And on the back of that comes the Release 16 standards upgrades. So most of the networks today are based on the Release 15 standards. 16 was frozen about 18 months ago, and the first first commercial systems are starting to become available. So we want to see those get out into the market because they bring many of those capabilities which are going to be critical for security, for low latency. The secondary area is really around the intersection with the cloud and the edge. To that sort of what Dr. Massey mentioned about the operate through side of it. How could, as an industry, we utilize the public cloud for better security, data privacy, localization, and also for latency use cases? And a big challenge what we're seeing at the moment is how do we guarantee consistently low latency when we use these edge networks, because it's no good if the latency fluctuates, especially if you're doing, say, an augmented reality types of application, because if the latency fluctuates too much, you get seasick, and it's not a very usable service. And the last area, which I think is becoming a major focus now for a lot of our customers, is around private networks. There's a large focus from the government in many of our markets in terms of pushing towards enterprises to start thinking about how to adopt 5G within the private networking environments. I think we see it at the moment, especially in the West here, there's a big risk. Asia and China certainly are very aggressive in this momentum with their Set Sail program, focusing on trying to be a leader in sort of in 5G within manufacturing and the industrial sector to give them sort of economic leadership. And I think a big focus now we're seeing from a lot of our Western customers is really a drive to actually not be left behind. And again, this is very much about trying to understand how do we get a 5G private network deployed? How do we coexist in an environment where we maybe have other technologies like Wi-Fi, potentially even integrating into non-terrestrial networks with the low Earth orbit satellite technologies as well. So these are some of the big areas that we're prioritizing at the moment.
No question. And how do you snap into a commercial environment or go sort of up and down to 4G, up to internal wireless, et cetera? I'm sure, no question, very complicated. Devarius, I think about the things that no question that you are facing in those type of scenarios. But what's on the top of the list for you all this year to try to make sure that you get the tracks laid down on?
Yeah, so we're beginning to look at the ensuring that the cybersecurity challenges are always at the forefront. I think we're beginning to also look at cost. Because with every technology and every implementation, there's always cost, and the reality is 5G is not cheap. When you begin to look at the various implementations, as well as the different nuances, parts, and pieces that are required in order to properly implement it, because you're building on top of different technology. 3G goes to 4G, 4G goes to 5G, but then you have other many different pieces in order to make that work as well. So we're beginning to assess the financial landscape and the responsibility that is required as well. We're also beginning to look at our back-end infrastructure and networks. because with 5G, there's a significant amount of fiber that needs to be laid as well in order for that to be successful. And when it comes to laying fiber, that also requires a significant financial responsibility also. So the funds are definitely something that we're definitely looking to enhance. Granted, within the government, you have to be very strategic when it comes to future planning. So for this fiscal year coming up, we're definitely putting a lot of emphasis in that and definitely looking at the cyber challenges and risks that are associated with it. That is continuously as we continue to go. So a lot of good things moving, but definitely putting emphasis on being able to get the financial assistance to be able to help us continue to evolve.
A lot of interesting angles there. So I appreciate you highlighting those. Brian, how about at Verizon? You're working on a lot of various activities in regards to 5G, implementing it, including what we talked about with the Air Force. What's on the top of the priority list for Verizon for this year for 5G?
Number one priority is building out the network and actually implementing our C-band acquisition. So as new licenses come from the FCC, we're actually aggressively rolling that out. One thing too that we always talk about now, it's new and it's great, is on the mid-band. We're still actively rolling out millimeter wave, right? We see huge demand on millimeter wave. We're very excited about it. A lot of the use cases out there, obviously, it doesn't propagate far as wide as the mid-band spectrum, but if you're talking about a warehouse for a Defense Logistics Agency or Army Corps of Engineers, millimeter wave, we're very excited with, for instance, the Veterans Administration in Palo Alto, where we have a 5G surgical center working with companies like Microsoft and Metavis, where we're doing 3D imaging, right, which makes sense. But also looking at a VA complex where we will actually deploy 5G millimeter wave in certain areas, but also have 5G mid-band actually outside of the hospital or indoors, and then also 4G technology. So building out infrastructure is probably the biggest thing going on for us right now, because as you can imagine, we have many use cases. It's not just the devices themselves, but there's a huge broadband initiative that we see in 5G, what we call fixed wireless access, as a huge catalyst for us. Some things as we go into the end to kind of whet the appetite a little bit here. Luke, you're always pushing the envelope to see what we can get out of us. We're looking at release 16, obviously in 5G standalone core. So we're doing some testing as we go right now. So you'll see some stuff from us going into the end of this year, going into 23. We'll bring you into things like network slicing. And I would say the other big thing that we're starting to see a big push, probably picking up, but we're starting to pick up now and going into the end of this year in 23, a lot more private network builds. Right, so we have customers, government as well as enterprise customers looking to deploy private networks today, which I think is very exciting for us. So a lot of good things in growth.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting angle, right? When you hear about these private networks and you're thinking about the various of pointing out the costs, et cetera, who better to build that than the folks that do this sort of across the globe. But do these sort of special environments. So it sounds like you're doing something like that in the Air Force at those bases, perhaps. All right, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about 5G and the implementation. Specifically, we're talking about priorities. Dan, I'm going to ask you, there's no question you have a lot of different initiatives going on. What are you focused on this year as far as your top, 2 or 3 priorities there?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and give you 3 plus a cross-cutting one. Right?
Sounds great.
A little bit there, but so I think one of the interesting challenges here is 5G is so diverse, and all of our panelists have already touched on aspects of this. Right, we were just talking about MIMO and beamforming and all the stuff happening at the 5G radio access network, or the 5G RAN. And so on the radio access network, I think one of our top priorities really is spectrum agility and spectrum sharing. Right? At the physical layer, when we actually transmit the bits across across the air, there's a lot of contention for that space, a lot of contention for that spectrum. That spectrum is highly valuable. How do we appropriately use that spectrum, share that spectrum? And so one priority at the 5G radio access network, the 5G RAN part, is spectrum sharing. Mm-hmm. Second priority is going to take us in a different direction, and Darius did a great job of pointing out that 5G has a lot of wired connectivity, right? We tend to think of 5G as it's that wireless transmission, and it is, but it's also the 5G core network. Was mentioned by a couple of panelists, network slicing. What can we do on the back end once the signal reaches the tower? Can we put this on a virtual slice, essentially a virtual network on top of the network that could give us some added security, some added performance? And so on the core end, I would say that that network slicing and understanding better security in the core is our second key priority. And then the third one, just to make sure we fill out the whole 5G picture, right? So we could say 5G is all about the wireless part of the network, the spectrum, and it kind of is. Or we could say, no, 5G is all about the wired network and the back end core, and it kind of is. Or we could say, really, 5G is all about the edge computing, the cloud computing, bringing that cloud to the edge. And that's also been touched on by several of the other panelists. Right? If we can get MEC resources, that 5G edge computing out there, we can do a lot more things that might be better suited for disconnected environments where we have, say, unreliable backhaul back to the cloud, to be expeditionary environments, even in a scenario where we have great connectivity back to the cloud, back to the generic internet cloud throughout the world. Having that edge computing right there near the towers, right there near the edge, as the name implies, could give us additional benefits in terms of low latency processing that otherwise might not be possible. So those are my three: RAN sharing, so spectrum sharing, spectrum agility on the RAN side, security slicing on the core side, edge computing, bringing that edge computing to the battlefield in our case, in the case of DoD, and finally my fourth bonus one in there is all of those are heavily dependent on getting security right. We can't share spectrum appropriately if we don't have security in at that level. We can't do slicing. We can't manage the core if we can't do security. That edge computing is great, but if that edge computing is not secure, very much limits its usefulness. So that's sort of our big picture, and I know that's a lot, but 5G is an interesting challenge.
Appreciate the top line there. Very interesting to see all those different pieces getting pulled together. John, top priority for Palo Alto Networks as you all look at 5G and this implementation that's going on across the spectrum. Dan gave us a very nice top line on the various parts that they're focused on.
Yeah, sure thing, Luke. Two things to emphasize. The first one is about one of our very top priorities for the coming year, and that's about partnerships. We found that just like everything in security, partnerships are absolutely key to success. And these include partnerships with the 5G providers. Brian mentioned Verizon. We also have them with AT&T, Dish, IBM, and others. By the way, we just announced that we're partnering with Deloitte to offer clients in the US a new suite of managed security services for 5G, kind of in an answer to the call of our customers who are seeking an expanded level of managed support for their programs. But another important partnership is the one I mentioned earlier, NIST's National Cyber Center of Excellence. It takes a teamwork approach to do this well, so effective partnerships are one of our top priorities for the coming year. But the second point, I have some advice for government organizations about priorities. As in most areas of cybersecurity, achieving success is another example of shared responsibility between governments and industry to collectively develop plans that are going to ensure that our critical lifeline activities that are enabled by 5G are appropriately secure, as we've been talking about here many times. So as government organizations seek to address concerns about 5G cybersecurity, I have four quick pieces of advice. Number one, I would encourage the use of state-of-the-art scalable security tools and capabilities. Number two, I would promote and incentivize ICT vendor best practices and transparency. Number three, you should work with vendors that are open to shared responsibility between the ICT vendors, the telcos, enterprise owners and operators, and all of those that demonstrate best practices. And then finally, I recommend you promote automated sharing of actionable cybersecurity threat information among operators and other stakeholders for better situational awareness and prevention of successful cyber attacks.
Here on that last one, no question about that. I think we would all agree. Well, we only have a few minutes left, and we always like to wrap up the show and talk about what the future looks like. Brian, we're going to start with you at Verizon. You had talked about the implementation rollout of the 5G network there. What's it going to look like in a couple of years? 5G completely rolled out at that point? We're talking about 6G?
Yeah, I mean, it lays the foundation for obviously 6G on our 5G network, right? As I mentioned earlier, that we are excited that we'll start into 5G standalone core, get into network slicing. We'll open up the ecosystem even more. The C-band rollout will complete at the end of 2023, if not sooner, which is very exciting. And then we'll start looking at other spectrum assets to see where we can also deploy 5G as well as millimeter wave, right? So building out that network. More importantly, bringing the edge compute and working with our leading providers today, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft from an edge compute standpoint. And I think you're going to see the proliferation of application and use cases. That's one of the biggest things I talk about 5G. It's very exciting to talk about the bits and the bytes, the RAN, but more importantly, what is the application or what is the problem or business outcome we're trying to achieve that 5G can actually enable, right? I think that is first and foremost, what are we actually trying to solve? So very exciting for the future going forward.
Thank you, Brian. John, how about at Palo Alto Networks? 2 years from now, what are you all going to be pulling out of the lab and putting into production?
Yeah, Luke, I think my vision would be about laying the right cybersecurity foundation. So as federal agencies go through their digital transformation and begin to embrace 5G networks with a focus on driving digitization, prioritizing the deployment of strong security posture is absolutely critical. And I think this requires three elements. One, zero trust security. And we talked about this in a federal executive forum last month. Extending zero trust security into 5G with machine learning, next generation security capabilities is going to help protect end-to-end 5G infrastructure across all layers and key locations of this distributed cloud-native, multi-cloud 5G architecture. Segmenting 5G networks for zero trust access can also reduce the volume and impact of attacks. The second one is about granular visibility. And, going back to what Dan talked about in observability, one of the biggest lessons we've learned is you have to have real-time visibility. And I would argue that kind of cross-cuts, across the other functions of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Legacy security approaches lack the visibility needed to prevent cyber attacks that target 5G networks. Comprehensive protection and context-driven security at scale is what's key to protecting 5G networks from attacks. And that requires granular visibility across all layers and at key locations of the network. So comprehensive protection of various federal agencies' infrastructure requires consistent, real-time, granular visibility and control across the 5G traffic that's passing through the network in real time. Based on the sensitivity or criticality level, this is going to provide the ability to identify and control the level of access that each device or user is granted, and which is also part of the zero trust approach. And then finally, automated security. You're going to have real-time automated security enforcement at the network level and device level, which is critical to a vision of the future.
No question that you're going to have machine speed type of capabilities to address these type of requirements. Stephen, how about you're actually in an interesting position there where you're testing and seeing a lot of this stuff way before it's going to get implemented. So what does that look like? And what does the future look like from where you all stand in regards to 5G and the full implementation of 5G?
Yeah, I would say automation seems to be the key demand that we're seeing in a lot of the sort of work that's going on at the moment. How do we automate networks to help them be more agile, but also to keep costs down, which you heard earlier on about the cost side of it. So we're seeing certainly a drive to bring more and more automation technologies inside the network, from how it's planned, how it's deployed, how it's operated. I think that's probably one of the key areas, and utilizing sort of early machine learning, maybe a bit of early artificial intelligence to drive that. I think what some of the innovative areas that I'm pretty excited about that we're starting to see as well is starting to think about using the radio network as a sensor in itself, so radio sensing. So we tend to think of the radio network and 5G as a mechanism for delivering our services, voice, video, data. But actually the radio itself provides a very rich set of additional information on the objects and the environments it's operating within. And we're only starting to sort of scratch the surface and realizing that that's a very powerful set of information that could be used to give tactical advantage. And I think that's a big area we're going to see more and more of. And the other, probably the last area is around, again, on the radio side of it, we've got early technologies called integrated access backhaul, which is basically where you're using the radio as a mechanism to, instead of having fiber installations where you can backhaul or daisy chain between cell sites to keep costs down. But I think we're going to see an enhancement of that as we start to realize there's opportunities here to have really rapid deployments where you don't need to have that in-ground fiber implementations, where you can actually use some of the available spectrum to actually create these mesh backhaul networks. And that sort of whole mesh network design starts becoming more and more prevalent, both in the public sector, but also in the military. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that there coming in the next number of years, because just with where we're seeing the early demand and the testing.
Interesting early insight on some of the things that are being thought about and actually tested. Looking forward to that. Devarius, you talked about the Cyber Center. You've talked about getting a handle on the cost. Brought up some very interesting points. 2 years from now, where do you see the Army Corps of Engineers in regards to the use of this technology to enable, your mission?
Yeah, so from a Corps of Engineers perspective, we're a fully remote work environment. And so what does that mean? We're spread out throughout the various districts and divisions within the United States. And we have about, maybe before COVID, we were about 70%. I think now we've transitioned to about 90% remote work. And with that being said, I believe that construct will continue to be. So when you think 2 years from now, you think more in a hybrid concept, more workers working from many different areas due to the transition and transformation of COVID that has forced us in that way. So from a remote perspective, I see the enablement and the use of 5G technology to enhance the end user experience. So what does that mean? We have construction engineers at many different, not just construction sites, but we have engineers at levees, locks, dams, and those type of things. So being able to work optimally in a less controlled environment, but more so in a free space as an engineer, that's improving the end user experience. Those that are working from a remote location, having the ability to access not just data, but other mission critical elements, and then the need to share information with a lot of external partners. In 2 years, I believe from a 5G perspective, we will have significantly evolved in that space. And we'll definitely improve the end user experience, which will help from a Corps of Engineers perspective, our ability to deliver projects on time, within budget, and of quality, because I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do, enhance the end user experience through the leveraging of 5G capability.
Yeah, sort of real-time capability there locally really unlocks a lot of capability for your engineers, no question about it. Rob, how about at U.S. Air Force? It sounds like you all went through a early implementation phase in some of the air bases there. It looking like you're scaling up very nicely. What do you think it looks like in a couple of years? And I heard somebody talking about drones a little while ago. I don't know if that comes into play here, or what type of capabilities get unlocked with the Air Force once you start to implement these all across the world, I guess, in these bases.
Well, a lot of those capabilities already are in place. What it does is it enhances them. We already use drones. So what I'd really like to talk to is the hybrid world that we're about to move into. So one of the things that's brought up, private versus commercial. So for those truly unique pieces, yeah, we're going to look at private networks to solve, whether it's taking advantage of millimeter wave in a factory, or because we do have factories in Air Force or in maintenance facilities or whatnot. but there's so much to be used and utilized in the commercial piece. So one of the things that we're realizing more and more is both that we're not as special as we think we are. There's a whole lot of things that we thought that were uniquely DoD that may not be. And then there's a lot of lessons learned we're seeing in the world today about what commercial technologies can bring to you that being in a purely private model doesn't make sense. So, and I'm referring to the Ukraine, and look how Starlink was able to get capability in place very quickly and then mitigate issues very quickly. Not something you could typically do when it's a DoD-owned capability. We are not nearly as agile. So hybrid in that way, but also hybrid from this perspective of 5G. And it's one of the things that Brian touched on. There's going to be places where it makes sense for millimeter wave, going to be places where it makes sense for mid-spectrum, a lot of different things. So really, we need to really, and I'm coming back to this, really define our requirements, understand the use cases, what we're trying to do, so we're applying the right capability to the right situation. And I want to reiterate that because so many of the cases, we have people in the field coming back saying, I need 5G. That's not the requirement. We need you to come to us and tell us, hey, what is it you need? Because it's really hard to defend that in the budget. And it's hard for our vendors out there to understand, what is it I'm trying to supply you when you're just saying, hey, I need something? And then the last thing I want to reiterate is I really appreciated John's comments about security, but I would say more broadly, today's castle and moat model has been proven ineffective. So everything he said is not just about 5G. It is irrespective of the connectivity model you have in any and all situations. We need to be moving that direction.
No question about that. Well said. Dan, take us home from your perspective, looking at the sort of across the DoD spectrum. What does it look like in 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll piggyback immediately off the zero trust comment there and some of Rob and John and Brian and everyone. Right? So this really is critical. I mean, zero trust takes us away from that castle and moat, right? The castle and moat model said the bad guys are outside the network, on the outside of the network. The good guys are on the inside of the network. We've got this castle and moat that keeps us there. Especially when we move to a hybrid 5G world. Where's the castle and moat? There is no castle and moat. There is no outside the network, inside the network. We really have to move to that zero trust. And as was already touched on, that information sharing is critical. That helps us get together. And as Rob was pointing out as well, right? We really have to be in partnership with the commercial agencies here. This is not. This should not be DoD go it alone. This or any agency go it alone. This needs to be done in partnership with our commercial partners. So just to kind of end with one interesting challenge from our side. So given all this, one thing I'm very interested in understanding what's going to happen in the next year or two. What does our network operations center or our security operations center look like in this hybrid world? So Network Operations Center or NOC, Security Operations Center or SOC. What does that NOC SOC look like in the context of Department of Defense 5G network? I think that's a really interesting question. I think that kind of cross-cuts a lot of what we're talking here. That includes that, because that network now includes that edge computing. It includes the spectrum issues. It includes the core network. How do we get all that? How do we get all that together? So I think that's going to be a really interesting challenge, and I would love to at some point walk into the NOC SOC for whatever deployment, whether it's commercial, whether it's DoD private, whether it's some sort of hybrid, and have that good understanding of this is what the network's able to do. And last, I'll just reiterate, stealing from Rob there, 5G itself is not a requirement. It's not, we don't want 5G. We want the technology that 5G can bring. And so understanding that and doing that in a secure way, I think is where we go in the future. So
right, and really focusing on the capability that 5G can bring versus 5G itself. Hey, listen, this has been a fantastic show, and I really want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for this program. I'd like to thank the folks that sponsor us for supporting this show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Radio that make our program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank the listening audience out there that tune in every month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.